up, guys? Welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to be continuing our Learn About Vintage Watches series. I think this has been really helpful for a lot of you, at least the feedback that I've received from you. It seems like this series is super helpful. We've created videos, they're probably in the side panel that you can see them. We've created videos about what's important to collectors, things looking at specific parts of the watch, discussing patina, looking at crystals. I looked at the whole Rolex Daytona line because that's a very popular vintage watch that people are into, and that's kind of where they start to get into. So check out those videos, they're probably in the side panel. We also have a playlist of all of our Learn About Vintage Watches episodes, so you can check out that series. Today what we're going to be discussing is something that we got asked recently, and that is what vintage watch brands to start looking at, or what brands that have vintage watches should I collect, should I look into to starting my vintage watch journey. So that's going to be what we're going to be discussing today. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, smash a like button for this series. It really does help us out, as well as subscribe to the channel because it's really close to the like button, so it's not much more effort. So diving right into the topic, what brands that you should collect when it comes to vintage watches. So I think there's a couple criteria that you should run through to figure out what brands you want to focus your vintage watch collection on. There's 4 questions that I'm going to pose and kind of discuss, and I think that you should consider when trying to identify what brands or brand you want to focus on when it comes to your collection. So the first thing, and this is basically a rule that I have for any type of collecting or anything that you really do in life, is you need to find a brand that you actually like. A lot of the times when people are getting into collections, they kind of, follow, I don't want to say the masses, but they look for the way other people got into vintage watches and how they decided to create their collections, and a lot of times they follow those. Which there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of information about those types of watches out there because a lot of people are interested in them and like the designs, but really you want to focus on what you like, figure out what type of watch you like, what type of complications you like, what era you like, etc. So I'll use myself as an example. This was my first vintage watch purchase ever. This is a memo sale yacht timer that I purchased. Like I said, it was the first vintage watch I purchased, and I wouldn't say that this is an extremely collectible, or there's a big market for those who really like memo sales, like people who are interested in collecting vintage Speedmasters or Rolex Mariners or something like that. So, but I figured out that I really love blue dials. I really love the yacht timer complication. I don't think I really focused on the type of era that I liked. This watch is from the 1970s. 1970s has a little bit of a quirky design to it. It's very typical of 70s fashion design and art design. Watches kind of followed suit with the way in which they're designed. So I didn't really look at that, but I just really liked the way that this watch looked. And that's how I started collecting vintage watches. So figuring out what types of watches you enjoy and what types of design elements you like, or that's what you really want to focus on. The next is, after you figure out what you like, you want to look at what is actually available on the market. So I can say, I really love, this is not watch related, let's say I really love Fabergé eggs, just as an example. Those are not very available on the market, so it's kind of hard for me to be a collector and get into collecting those if I can't really get my hands on them. So what you want to do is look at the watch market, and that ranges from vintage watch dealers, but also you can look at collectors that you may know, or very, very carefully look at sites like eBay, go to trade shows, go to auction houses, and look at the catalog that they have of watches that are actually being sold, and figure out, I like these types of watches. See what watches are available on the market at reasonable prices that you can afford, and identify what's out there. And I could say, yeah, I want to be a collector of all 1518s. Well, it's very hard to get a hold of 1518s from Patek Philippe if you aren't aware. So it's a very rare watch. First of all, made in very few quantities. The collectors who have them are obviously extremely serious about collecting and probably don't want to get rid of them, so it's hard to do that as well. So you want to be able to find a type of watch that is approachable to you, and you're able to get your hands on it on the market that currently is around. That's the second question. The third question I think is extremely important is how much information is available out on the internet, in books, in literature, in video content. How much information is out there for you to consume about the types of watches or the type of watch that you want to collect. I think one of the most important things is to collect as much information as you possibly can about a watch before you end up buying it. You want to know everything about that specific reference. You want to know about the history of the production of the watch. You also then want to focus that information and compare it to the information that's available about that specific watch that you want to purchase. So there was some information about the memo sale online that I did my research on, which helped me kind of pull the trigger on purchasing this watch. So I think that information is only going to aid. Well, first it's going to get you really excited about your purchase, and then it will also aid in figuring out the specific watch, making sure that it's exactly like it should be. There's no fake parts. There's no redials if you don't like it. There's no polishing. You understand when this specific watch was produced, looking at the manufacturing numbers, and that type of information is only going to aid you when it comes to figuring out what you want to purchase. So the amount of information out there when it comes to the brands is going to be super important. And then the last thing, I think this kind of comes down to, this is something that should always be considered. And last thing is, what type of community is surrounding this watch or this brand that you want to collect? I think the communities that are created through watches are what really makes this hobby special. You can share your thoughts and share your enjoyment for these timepieces with those individuals. That's what is going to make it special. So there's a couple ways you can think about this. You can join an already existing community. So those who like to collect underlined Rolexes, maybe that is the community that you want to join. But I think there's also a way that you can look at this where you are actually creating a new community within the watch world and creating a community around a specific watch. So I wouldn't say the community for memo sales is that large or that wide, but I like to think that I'm a big supporter of this watch and these watches that were created in the 70s, and I don't think I'm creating a community. I think I'm just adding to it, but I think there's a way that you can do both. So those are kind of the 4 questions you should ask yourself when it comes to trying to identify a brand that you want to collect. I'm going to go over 3 brands and one additional category that I think are interesting places to start when it comes to collecting vintage watches. I think these are companies that, and I'll basically answer the 4 questions that I have about trying to identify a brand to collect for each of these. So the first one, and this is probably a no-brainer for a lot of you, but I think Omega is an extremely collectible brand that a lot of first-time collectors get into. When it comes to the first question, which is what do you like, there's such a variety of different types of Omegas that are out there. There are dive watches, there are dress watches, there are chronographs, Speedmaster, Seamaster. There's so much out there that Omega has, and I'm sure one of the lines will probably tick the box that you're looking for when it comes to what type of watch you like. There's a huge market of vintage Omegas. I will say it's become a little bit harder to identify quality vintage Omegas. That's just a testament of the fact that collecting has become so popular. So there's a big market out there for these watches. You just need to make sure that you identify the right piece. The information that's out there are incredible amounts of information on vintage Omega in both video and literature, but there's also forums where people post a lot of useful information that you can use. And then the last thing is communities. The vintage Omega community is huge. Actually, just to back up really quickly, the manufacturer Omega has a huge presence when it comes to supporting their collectors. So if you have questions about the watches that you want to purchase, contacting Omega is a great source of information. And that kind of adds to the fact that my last question, which is a community, there's a huge community out there, whether it is the manufacturer or it is the Omega enthusiasts that you can find online. The next brand, it's another no-brainer. This is Rolex. This is for people who are perhaps a little bit more into for the majority. This is people who are a little bit more into sporty watches. There are, more classical watches like the Rolex 6062, which is a very beautiful dress watch. But if you're into a little bit more sporty watches and that's what you like, Rolex is definitely a brand that you can look at. Vintage Rolex has become, well, it's always kind of been a popular market. I think there's definitely ways that you can get accessibility to these watches, but it's going to take a little bit more time for you, just based on the prices that vintage Rolexes are selling for. Again, huge forum presence, both online, but there's also literature, books written about Rolex. Not Alfredo Permico, John Goldberger or Aho Montanari has written a lot of books about Rolex, so you can check those out. And there are a lot of communities that love Rolex. I'm sure you're well aware of the popularity that Rolex has on YouTube as well as Instagram. The last is Seiko. I think Seiko is a very, very collectible brand. I think it's mostly driven by the community, actually. There's a lot of people who have brought Seiko kind of to the forefront of people's minds. Seiko's Seiko has a variety of different types of designs that they have implemented in their watches. I think I'm not super well. I'm not really deep into the Seiko collecting community, so I can't really speak too closely about it. But I do know that there's a really great community of people who can answer a lot of questions that you have if you can find them. So definitely check out Seiko if that's a brand that you're interested in looking into. And then the last thing, and this is it's not a brand, but I think this is a genre of watches that has shown that it's extremely collectible, and that is Swiss chronographs from between the 1940s to the 1960s. Swiss chronograph, and these don't have to be from the big name brands. Just to think of it, the Universal Genève chronographs aren't the ones I'm specifically talking about, but they probably fall into this category. There are other chronographs that are from companies like Le Jour, which I believe is a French company. There's also, Le Jour is one of them. There are also these really beautiful gold chronographs they're just signed Swiss chronograph, I'm pretty sure, but they're really, really beautiful as well. So looking at chronographs between the 40s and 60s is probably the nicest period of vintage chronographs. I think that is a really collectible era. I think it's not something that people are looking at very, very often. A lot of the times these watches are made with mass-produced movements, but there are some that have very well put together movements as well. So there's different ways that you can probably collect Swiss chronographs, and I think it's really up to you to strategize on how you want to put it together. Do you want to collect chronographs from a bunch of different companies that use exactly the same movement, or do you want to collect one type of chronograph in different iterations from different eras? There are different ways you can do it, but I think Swiss chronographs are a place that you can look and find a lot of enjoyment. Also, the chronograph, just for your information, a lot of watchmakers believe that the chronograph movement is actually one of the hardest movements to actually put together. So you're getting a very interesting movement out there. So that's kind of my fourth recommendation. I hope this was useful for you to kind of think about the way that you should think about what brand you want to collect when it comes to vintage watches, as well as maybe just spark some of your thoughts on where you want to go with your collecting. I think these are easy places to start. They might be obvious to some, might not be obvious to some of you, might be obvious to some of you, but regardless, I think this is going to be a useful part of this series. I hope you guys found this useful. If you haven't seen our other videos where we talk about, where we have continued our series about learning about vintage watches, be sure to check it out. We have a playlist, so check out our channel for that playlist, as well as subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. Also, be sure to smash that like button for identifying what brands you want to collect. If you like one of these, you should smash the like button, and let me know in the comment section below what you think about our suggestions, and if you have any other suggestions leave them in the comments because I think they're going to be useful for anyone who stumbles across this video. And with that said, guys, hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time.